Hey everyone, my name is Martin. I'm a producer and songwriter from the Netherlands, and in today's video we'll be going over a song that is featured on The Weeknd's latest album called Sacrifice. So the song was produced by Swedish House Mafia, Max Martin, Oscar Holter and The Weeknd himself, and I think the production is an absolute masterpiece. It has some really interesting elements that I recreated and that I would like to show you in this video. So grab yourself a cup of tea and let's get started. In my opinion, the most ear-grabbing feature in this song is this talking guitar synth, which sounds something like this. I'm using the Electric Sunburst Deluxe library in Kontakt to create the foundation of this sound, but the actual sound design happens in the processing. So if we head to the Sounds Mixer track, we find a lot of plugins. And I know my philosophy usually says less is more, but in this case we actually need these plugins to go from a rather simple guitar sound to something that hopefully sounds a little more similar to the talking guitar that is used in the original production. So we start with the Woe2 plugin by Sugar Bytes, which is a filter box that creates this smooth vowel talking sound. I'm then using an instance of FabFilter Saturn for some saturation and grid, followed by Guitar Rig 6. Now this plugin contains quite a few plugins itself, such as a few compressors, another saturation tool, and importantly these wah-wah and formant filters, which add more of this talking effect to the guitar sound. I then follow with a very subtle reverb to add a sense of space, the free Pancake 2 to create this fast panning effect between left and right, a glue compressor to tighten the sound, the free DJM filter to tame some of that harsh high end, Ozone Imager, which is free as well, to make the sound wider and more stereo, an instance of OTT for some more tightness, and finally Kickstart to add this smooth ducking effect whenever the kick is played. Now, whenever I played this original guitar pattern in the playlist, it would sound slightly off in terms of timing, which is why I bounced the pattern to dry audio using the Consolidate This Track tool, and then I routed this audio to the same mixer channel as the original guitar. Crucially, our talking guitar is supported by this bass sound, which adds a sense of groove and energy to the guitar. And to create the sound, I used the Retro 60s preset in Trillion, which is a sampled bass guitar that I use a lot in my remakes and in other productions, but once again the mixing plays a big role in achieving the final sound. I'm starting the chain with R-Bass by Waves, which adds a bit of warmth and body to the part slightly above the sub-frequencies. I then added the Pro Q to remove all of the sub-frequencies and to make everything below 150 Hz mono by simply removing all of the sound, side or stereo information below 150 Hz, which is a technique also known as mid-side EQ. Finally, I'm using some analog saturation using Decapitator to beef things up a little and to give the bass some edge. So I'm using this bass guitar in the verses and in this short 4-bar refrain part, but in the pre-chorus and in the chorus, I'm actually using a different bass, which is the Fatty preset in Trillion. In terms of processing, there's not that much going on, except for a glue compressor to kind of control the sound a little bit, and an EQ cutting everything below 55 Hz in the pre-chorus. In the chorus, however, I wanted this bass synth to contain some more sub-frequencies, which is why I automated the cutoff frequency, such that it falls to around 30 Hz when the chorus starts. Now this is a very smooth production trick that you can apply in most songs that really makes the chorus sound deeper and bigger through the additional low end that suddenly kicks in when the chorus of your song starts playing. In the same chorus, as well as in the short refrain part at the beginning, I'm also using this piano sound from Keyscape to play the following chords. Now, without any effects, this piano sounds really warm and kind of dark, so I tried to brighten it up using some multiband compression in FabFilter's Pro MB, as well as using Pro Q3. I'm then using a compressor to make the sound a bit tighter and more compact, followed by an S1 imager to make the piano sound wider, and a vintage verb for some room. Let's then take a look at the sounds playing in the pre and in the chorus that make this record sound so 80s, which are the synth pads. So the first pad I'm using comes from the Retro Machines MK2 library in Kontakt and plays these really cool chords. And like the piano, this pad sounds kind of dark and dull without any processing, so I added OTT, an equalizer to remove the lows and some mud, the free Tel Chorus plugin which adds this cool 80s sound, and two different flangers. So the first one creates a smooth flanger effect that is enabled throughout the entire song, while the second one has a far stronger flanger effect that I only enable at the final two bars of the pre-chorus using an automation cloud. The other synthpad layer comes from Omnisphere and actually contains samples from the OB8 and the legendary Juno 60 synthesizer, and in terms of processing, this pad is roughly the same as the Matrix pad, including the flanger automation at the end of the pre-chorus. Another element that is adding this really nice 80s disco vibe is this high violin string that is playing a B in the refrain, the pre, and the chorus segments. I'm using the Session Strings Pro 2 library in Kontakt to get a realistic violin sound, and I automated both its volume and its reverb to make sure that the string ends without any decay or reverb tail when it stops playing. And this simply makes the transition between the refrain and the verse sound a lot tighter. So now that we've discussed all the instruments, synths, and basses, let's take a look at the drums. In the intro and the first verse, I'm using a kick sample that sounds kind of thin, especially because of this high-pass filter which cuts off all the lows below 70 Hz. I'm also compressing the kick to make it sound more punchy and feel less heavy in the overall mix. Now, as we transition from the verse to this short refrain part, I'm applying a similar trick as done before with the fatty bass, which is automating the kick's high-pass filter in a way that the kick's bottom end, so everything below 70 Hz, only comes in once the refrain starts. And to add even more body and depth, I'm also layering the thin kick with this unprocessed bottom kick, which sounds like this. Some other drums I'm using are these two snare samples that are both routed to the same mixer channel, where I applied some compression, some corrective EQ, and some stereo shaping to get this wide snare sound. Then when the refrain starts, I'm adding a third snare layer, which plays in the center of the mix and contains more body, which makes for another nice contrast relative to the thin and minimal sounding intro and verse segments. I'm also using this open hi-hat that simply plays on every beat, which I tried to make pretty wide using Ozone Imager, and I also made it pan from left to right using Pancake 2. Then at the start and the end of every two bars, there's this other open hat, which kind of adds a sense of rhythm to the hi-hat pattern. And in between these open hats, there is this smooth closed hat that adds even more movement. And in the chorus, I'm using another closed hi-hat layer that actually plays on every 16th beat to basically create more flow in this hooky part. Now before this hook and at several other parts in the song, there is this fill that I haven't discussed yet, which I actually created by just slicing and reordering this fill sample from the Cashmere pack that originally sounds like this, but sounds like this after my little treatment. So that's really it for all the different drum sounds, which I by the way routed to a drum bus, where I'm using the Quickchild 670 compressor by Waves, and what this one does is really just glue all the different drum elements together in a really smooth way. Lastly, there is still a couple of things happening in the background of the production that adds a little bit of ear candy to the song, like this tonal ambience that plays an E in the background and kind of fills up the space between the drums and the vocals, especially in the intro and in the first verse. Then there's also this flanger sweep at the end of the pre-chorus to create some more tension towards the chorus, and this tension is then released through this simple downlifter from the Cashmere pack. And then right after the chorus, there's also this really cool siren effect. And for this one, I'm using an alarm sample from the Murda pack, which I pitched down 300 cents and which I then cut because I only needed the last couple of seconds of it. So altogether, it's small effects like these that really are the icing on the cake in terms of adding atmosphere, detail, and even energy to any production. And I would definitely recommend you to use ear candy elements like these to spice up your productions. And that's it for the production breakdown. I hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial, and as always, you can download the free project file, the stems, and the MIDI files in the description below. Also, I'd really appreciate it if you could throw a like on this video, as I'm sure the algorithm would appreciate this as well. So let's go listen to the final result, which contains all the elements that I've discussed in this video. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. Feel free to send me a DM on Instagram to say hi, and I hope to see you next video.